And Sandra Rush is an entrepreneur who is also currently at Y Combinator, so he is also intimately involved with YC because he's already there for the second time. And yeah, I will give it up for the two of them, and then afterwards we will also have Elizabeth Rhodes here, who is leading the project at YC Research on the basic income, and we were going to have a panel with her too, where we will learn more about the study. So with that, let's please give it up for Sam and Sandra.
All right, so for this first session, we wanted to sort of zoom out a little bit and ask Sam some questions about why YC Research is doing what it's doing and why they chose to work on the projects that they did. And then for the next session, we'll dig a bit more deeper into the basic income study in particular.
Sounds good.
All right, so I guess the first intro question would be, why are you doing YC Research?
So, our goal has always been to make the future as good as possible for everyone, as much innovation as we can, as widely distributed as we can. And I do think that startups are a good way to do this for a lot of problems. But they're not the answer to everything. And our goal has never been like start more startup. It's been do this other thing. And there are some things, either because there's no way that they should make money, or because we just don't think they should be owned by a single company trying to maximize profits, that is work we want to support, that fits our mission, but is a bad fit for a startup. And after this came up, we kind of tried this in a few different ways. We started funding nonprofits. We started just like making grants to individual researchers. And then we realized there was an opportunity to do something more, and that there were these things that honestly governments are supposed to be doing, but we just don't do anymore. And one of the remarkable things is that it turns out you can do a lot of things at small scale with like a sort of private levels of capital and time that are the kinds of things governments used to do. That's one big advantage of technology. And so we thought we'd start, we'd try that. Our plan was to do one project per year. We have gone a little faster than that. But I think this will get more important to us over time, not less. I think there are these, we are at an unusual moment in history in terms of how much things are going to shift in a relatively short period of time, and trying to figure out ahead of time, what we're going to do about that, basic income, AI, a lot of other questions, rather than how we normally make decisions, policy decisions, which is wait until everything breaks and then make a decision in a crisis. I think this is, data's a good way of doing things. I think starting projects ahead of time is a good way of doing things.
So you know how multiple projects, AI, basic income, cities, and I'm curious to know, there are many problems in the world to work on. What was your decision-making process to choosing these? How do you decide which causes to work on?
It's really hard. There is a lot of, we collect as much data as we can. So, we try to work on the big problems that sort of massively affect society. And you can kind of make a list if you just sort of look at, like, healthcare obviously is huge. Cost of living, cities, housing, obviously huge. Future of work, AI. So you can look at the big ones, but in terms of the order to do them and the ones that we pick versus don't pick, that's really hard. We like to do things that where we feel like if we don't do them, they won't happen, and they're super important. So there are a lot of other hugely important projects in the world that we're not working on, but other people who are really good are, and we're happy about that. We're sort of, we want to get as much leverage, move the needle as much as we possibly can, and so part of it is picking things that no one else is doing, sort of things that are important and not happening.
So to follow up on that then, what's a big problem in the world right now what's the biggest one that isn't receiving enough attention of the big problems in the world?
Well, again, many of these, I think, work as for-profit companies. So I think certainly one of the biggest problems in the world is climate change. You can work on that as a startup really well. Capitalism is set up, not perfectly. We had to redirect it a little bit, but we can fund a lot of clean energy companies, and I believe one of them will work, and that's a really important thing to do. But that is a problem that is at a stage and a scale that I think works better for-profit companies. But that's a huge one. I think one that we have not yet decided to work on as a YC research project, but we may, is something around basically bioterrorism. I'm sort of surprised, given the magnitude of this problem. This is actually, I think, a place where capitalism falls apart a little bit, that there's just not that much work. We've met a lot of talented people. They're trying to go work for the government. They're not getting jobs. So if no one else does this, this is probably the kind of thing we would do. Again, food and water, hugely important problem. A lot of good people already working on that. I think we're seeing good things there. Education, huge problem. We have not cracked that out on that one yet. We'd be willing to try it again.
So bioterrorism would be the one.
Sorry, one more huge one, and this one, I don't even have like a attack vector on, or we would try something, is just sort of what's happened to governance and coordinated behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if we could find someone good to fund on that, we would do that today. And we've been trying, and we haven't even found people that really want to work on that. It just seems like such an intractable problem.
Mm. So now you've started these big projects, and obviously there are questions within each of them to, for example, in the basic income study, to measure the results of the study. But taking a step back to measure, let's say, that we're even making progress and that this is having a positive impact, how are you measuring the impact of your projects?
Well, again, these are meant, almost all of them are very long-term projects. You know, it's going to take 5 years until we have data back on basic income, and it may not work. It may be a bad policy. We may run the study badly. Who knows what? But it'll be a long time before we really know. Now, we'll have a sense of if it's going well or badly sooner than that. You know, I do believe we're going to get AGI built much more quickly than people realize, and I think that's like the most important thing going on in the world right now relative to the amount of attention it gets. But that's going to take more than 5 years too. So the timescales are very long. You can measure intermediate progress, and we do. I think that's really important. You need to have, I think people never measure enough. People never sort of set the standard on execution high enough. One of the things is if you're doing something really important to the world, you can sort of justify, oh, well, it's, you know, we're not doing as well as we could, but it's really important. And so we try not to let that happen. But, yeah, I mean, we just like, I think we try to set goals on all these projects and try to meet them.
That seems reasonable. So you're now working with research, and you used to you work mainly with startups. I'm curious, as someone who hasn't done research, what have you identified or noticed anything that research can learn from startups, or perhaps that startups can learn from research?
I think the thing that research can learn from startups well is how much it matters to just execute quickly and have a lot of momentum. So startups have the market force this, but it turns out to be the way things get done. You get things done gradually, step by step, and the next day you feel a little better and get a little more done. And if you're not doing anything at all, like, it's always easy to push it off another day and work on something else. So just the relentless focus and intensity of execution that startups have, I think researchers learning that has been really great. And then I think the thing that startups in our community have learned from the research work is the value of really big ideas. And that, you know, yes, you need to make progress every day, but you do want to say, like, here's where we're trying to get to 10 years from now if all this works, and here's why it matters.
And what about the other way around? Would you say that startups have something to learn from research?
Oh yeah, that's specifically that thing of the idea that you wanna have this big 10-year goal and work backwards.
Right. So you obviously have a lot of responsibilities in a range of different things. How involved are you personally in the YC research projects, and what excites you the most?
You know, honestly, I think this is not my original insight, but I think you either want to be a manager and manage people and manage projects but not be involved with all of them, or be laser focused on one thing and not try to do both. So the answer is I know a little bit about everything that YC is doing, but I think I do more harm than good, and I miss out on things that I actually have to do if I try to get too deep in any one thing. So that's sort of the sad part about my job, is because I miss the sort of intense operational involvement with any one thing. But I think this insight that you should either do one or the other is right.
Okay, and lastly for me, and before that, we can have a few audience questions after that, up to 3, so you can start thinking about those now. So I suppose many people in this room want to make a big positive impact, and you have and are in the process of doing that. So what advice would you give people who also want to make a big positive impact in the world, how to go about doing that?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this question because this is sort of like how YC operates. How do we find people that are going to do this? And what do we tell them? What do we advise them? I think a couple of things. One, like, don't wait. I think one of the things that Silicon Valley gets wrong is this mindset of first I'm going to do this startup I don't really care about to make money and then do the thing I care about. And I can't say exactly why that doesn't work because it sounds to me and it sounded to me like a reasonable theory. But having observed it a lot, it's better off to just jump into the thing you want to do and figure out how to make it work, even if it means you have less capital available and have to like do it more cheaply and scrounge it together somehow. But I have watched so many people tell me this is their life plan and then get distracted by, becoming an investor and having these great management fees, or, you want to do one more startup or whatever it is. People then put off what they actually want to do. So, if you want to have a big impact on the world, start now and don't let yourself make excuses about this other thing you're going to do first. I think the second thing is, and this is just like the hardest thing in life, but getting I think having original thought is like the hardest thing in life, and that's really important because the things that everyone else thinks a lot of people are working on, so if you don't do that, it's going to happen anyway. You want to have a big impact. The thing that has surprised me is people that make a real effort to learn to think original thoughts are actually able to do so. This is never taught in school. It's not taught in the work that I've ever seen. I taught a class on this once, on how to do this, and I mean to do it again and put it online sometime. But I think it is possible. And I think given that if you have the same thoughts as everybody else in the world, you will make no impact that wouldn't have happened anyway unless you just execute perfectly. Trying to come up with things that that otherwise wouldn't happen is actually really important and really underrated. And then the final thing I would say, I think Charlie Rose used to say that after meeting all these people that had done these things in the world, he observed that the 2 keys to getting hard things done or important things done were focus and personal connections. And people, I think, are just bad at both of those, honestly, most of the time. Most people are very transactional in their relationships. Every time I have gone out of my way to help people for no reason, I have always been surprised when years later it comes back and helps me do something really important. And in terms of focus, people try to do a lot of things. As I said, I think you can either manage a lot of projects or do one project really well. Hard to do both. And I think most people try to get that wrong.
All right. And now we have time for, I think, up to 3 questions. So when you state your question, get up and say it as loud as clearly as you can, and maybe also repeat the gist of the question. Yeah. Sorry.
I feel very passionate about the importance of education and learning. Looks like if you can improve that, you can improve many other areas. And what is probably most surprising about it is, looks like there are many opportunities to improve that at scale, but some of the biggest companies in the world who could have done that, like Facebook or Google, seems like they've done incredibly little to do any progress in that direction. Do you have any thoughts for why that is the case?
So the question is, why aren't companies like Facebook or Google doing more to make education better? I do have some thoughts. One is that we actually know a lot more about how to educate people really well. The problem is it's expensive and it takes a lot of human effort to be a great teacher. But if you have a great teacher giving their full attention to one kid, that kid's going to learn a lot. One of the things that I think that is very controversial is that although we are going to have massive job elimination because of technology, we're actually massively understaffed right now. So like, let's say the average teacher teaches like 30 kids. If we can free up a lot of other people, maybe we can have one teacher for one kid or two kids. And many people would find that quite a satisfying job. So I think like all of these changes in the world interrelate, but you can see a world where there's, as Alan Kay always would say, there is a teacher for every learner. And I think that would have a huge impact. I do think technology can help for sure. I think there are a lot of people working on that. I think though there is a mistake when people just sort of assume that that's going to fix all the problems with education. That has historically not worked. I do think it can go a lot further, and we should pursue that. We are pursuing that. But one of the things I hope is that as automation really comes online, one of the things that's going to happen is we're going to decide as a society to value education a lot more. And a lot of people will do that.
Yes, my name is Anne. I was wondering and curious, what are the main research questions that you hope that this research program on UBI will be able to answer?
The question is, what are the main research questions we're interested for UBI? The most important one by far is it a good policy? So a lot of people talk about this as if it's the obvious solution. It may be. There are other things we could try. And, I believe or I hope that if you supplement people with enough income that they can leave a bad boss or move or go retrain or just take a little bit of stress out of their lives, they will contribute more, they will produce more, they will be happier, they will be satisfied, they will still find things to do with their time, and that need to be needed will somehow get satisfied. So I think that's what I'd like to find, is that, hey, we actually can do this thing that is a net increase on GDP or wealth or whatever you want to call it, and eliminates poverty and makes people happier, healthier, better citizens, reduces crime, everything else that I expect will happen. But if not, then we shouldn't implement it, and it is good to test this before we have to make a hard decision.
All right, one last note about the study. Chip?
How far out do I think AGI really is? A true like superhuman artificial intelligence. My 10%. I would say there's a 10% chance that it is 7 years, and I have a 90% confidence interval it is within the next 30. So not very long. I mean, there are like a lot of credible people who would say that like the first thing AI ever really did to the world was make Trump win the election. But I think without, like the people that did the hacking were all using pretty sophisticated AI. I don't think unaided humans would have done that. And I think the sort of Twitter and Facebook manipulation, although a very, very, very weak version of AI, was still neural nets. So, you could argue that like, I think AI is already here in a big way. It has happened so gradually that we are like a frog in a pot of water, not noticing it's boiling. But I think there's already. Do they really? Every time? Huh. That's great. I feel better about that. No, that actually makes me feel a lot better. It's always like, that's a very dumb thing not to, yeah. But I do think like I think the algorithms are already much more in control of us than we realize.
All right, thank you. We have another session now for 30 minutes with both Sam and Elizabeth Rhodes, so I give the word to Julia.
Thank you, and we want to. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, and let's continue right away, and then we will have a few more Q&A afterwards too. So I'll sit over here. And I'm excited that I get to ask you all these questions about the project. So I heard that you guys are very data-driven. And I'm wondering what kinds of data you want to collect for this study, and what kinds of data you're personally most curious about. And do you have a pet theory that you might like to confirm with that?
We are collecting a lot of data. We are using at a high level, some administrative data that's collected by the state, things like IRS, other program participation kinds of data. We are conducting surveys, both in person and mobile, phone, short, just check in, have you moved, have you switched jobs, things like that. We are also using, we're piloting some new ways of measuring time use, because that's one of the, we want to see how this affects people's allocations of time. And so we're piloting some passive data collection that would sort of learn, okay, if you're here, you're at work, if you're here, you're at home. So we're testing some of those types of things. And then, I think we're also obviously we can't interview extensively all 3,000 people, but we're going to have a smaller subset that we, talk with, open-ended interviews more regularly to really try to get at, not only that these, outcomes are correlated, but what's driving them, what are the mechanisms of impact. And I think for me personally, that's part of some of the most exciting, is just getting to interact with people and learn what constraints they face still. It's not always... money is great, but there might be other things that they're struggling with, and we can learn that through the interviews.
Do you want to add something? Okay, great. In charity, there's this idea. It's not new, but it has gained more steam recently because both Bill Gates and also the Effective Altruist movement are advocating quantifying the impact, and not just in a vague sense, but quantifying it down to the dollar. So, for example, what is the cost of a life saved? What is the cost of quality adjusted life years? Do you have a model of quantifying impact that a basic income or universal basic income might have?
We do. You mentioned quality adjusted life years. We're using quality compatible measures, looking at health outcomes. There's an extensive amount of qualitative data, but I think there's a couple things that we're interested in as we think about UBI as a policy. And so one of them is savings and social costs. People talk about how to pay for it, but if people are healthier, if kids are attending school, doing better in school, if crime rates go down, there's enormous savings there. So we're going to be measuring those types of outcomes, and then structural model can plug in some of those types of things. We're collecting quite a bit of quantitative data, but I think, at a macro level, looking at the effects of the policy, we will be trying to sort of costs and benefits that, labor supply response, those kinds of things that can be used in structural models to sort of figure out what this would look like if it was implemented statewide or nationwide.
Cool. And maybe you could just give us the key facts about this planned project. So how long is it going to take? How big is it going to be?
So we are planning a randomized controlled trial, which is pretty much the gold standard for evaluating a social policy at this point. So we're enrolling 3,000 individuals. 2,000 of them will be in the control group and will receive $50 a month. And 1,000 will be in the treatment group and will receive $1,000 a month. Most of them for 3 years, a smaller group for 5 years. And this, we'll have a stratified sample so that where it's representative and in terms of race and gender and even income level within the income range. And then we will, have this statistically identical groups and be able to compare the average treatment effect. So how does individuals who receive the basic income compare to those that don't? We'll also hopefully have the statistical power to detect some heterogeneous effects are there certain, portions of the population, certain characteristics that make it more likely that they're going to do X, Y, or Z. And we will, as I said, it'll go for 5 years. We're going to be doing it in two regions. We're not sure yet exactly where those will be. There's been a lot more interest from states. People have been contacting us being like, hey, how do we get this done here? So we really want to partner closely with local government and local nonprofit organizations. And so we're currently going through that process.
I think one thing that's important to say that we're not doing is we're not focused on the economic feasibility of this as national policy. This is the thing that most people are talking about. The reason we're not, though, I think is important. I personally believe this would be a good policy even in the current world, although I admit politically quite difficult. In a world where we need this desperately, in a world where the AI really does arrive, I think the thing that everyone forgets is that a lot of current jobs go away, but the cost of living goes to almost zero. You can imagine a world where goods and services are just super affordable. You can point to a plot of land and say, hey, robots, like, mine the stuff under there, refine it, and build me a house. And then as long as we deal with land use, you can have a house. So in a world where I think we have to do this or we have to do something, it will be surprisingly affordable. And so even though that is the main thing other sort of think tanks and studies are working on, we're not addressing that at all.
Just one more thing that brought up is in the past, a lot of studies along these lines with the negative income tax, their main goal, what they care about, is do people work less? And I think we're looking at a much more holistic evaluation of how this affects individuals, not just employment, but as I said, time use and financial health and well-being and happiness and all those kinds of things.
Great. Yeah, and I'd like now to take it further than that and dream a little. Let's say we've done the study. It's been successful in that you got the measures that you wanted, and you can actually statistically, scientifically show the success that the study has had and that the universal income had. What happens after that? How do you go from having positive results from this study to the next step?
Well, I mean, I hope about the time we're finishing up the study, we will be starting a national conversation about what are we all going to do with this massive change that's coming. The reason that we're trying to build AGI in the way that we are is we think this is a technology and a societal shift that everyone needs to benefit from and everyone needs to have a voice in. And I think we are going to face the most radical reimagining of the social contract that the world has seen in a very long time. And as part of that, we would like to say, hey, we thought this might happen. Here is a set of data. Let's, as, a republic, decide what we're going to do. And we should all, have a voice and a vote in that. But here's our contribution. Here's what happens with one idea, one policy.
And I think, too, if we're not at that point, when this in 5 years, that the next step in terms of research would be it would really need to be done by a government, but an entire area to sort of do a saturation study, which really can't be done. It needs to be government. It's like whether it's entire state or everyone in the city. That'll answer some of the sort of macro level effects that we can't, but we might not have time for that. But
yeah,
we're not there yet.
Again, I can't make a confident prediction about true AGI. I have a very wide range on that, but I can just look at the hardware and make a confident prediction that narrow AI that can do effectively all repetitive human work will definitely be here in a short time frame. In terms of, most of the breakthroughs in AI in the last few years have just been lots and lots of hardware, and we already have visibility into what's being built there, and we will have, unlike Moore's Law, which has been slowing down, flops as usable for deep learning. We will have a 10x increase each year for the next at least 4 and probably 5 years. And so that alone, even if we never figure out another algorithm, even if we never figure out anything else, will still take this massive amount of work that is currently done by humans and have it be done by AI. And, we know that's going to happen.
Right. Yeah, and we touched on this earlier, that this is usually something that you would expect governments to do and governments to care about. But you are taking this on as a private organization. And do you think this is a unique thing that you're in the position to do, or do you think we're at a time in history right now where it's in the hands of regular citizens to think about the future and be more involved?
Yeah, I do believe that this is the kind of thing that government is supposed to be doing. But, if Einstein sent that letter again to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue saying, Mr. President, there's this really important thing that's coming and it's not obvious yet, but, in the field we know it's going to happen, you got to pay attention, probably wouldn't get out of the mailroom. And so we could have a longer conversation about what's gone wrong with governance, but I believe that, in the void of that, you have to have a lot of private organizations stepping up and doing these sorts of things.
And if people in the room want to get involved with that too, especially with UBI, so one thing is supporting your study. Is there anything else that people can do to spread the idea or to otherwise help the cause?
Yeah, I think There are a number of sort of advocacy groups and people wanting to push other types of research along those lines. But I think really broadening the conversation and including more voices. Right now, I'm not from tech. So I've never participated. I've worked in sort of poverty research and I've never heard as many conversations about the future of work. It's a very different conversation happening here. And I think I think it's great. And I think it needs to be carried outside of the sphere and broadened, because I think there are a lot of people who still, it's a very fringe idea. It's become much more mainstream here, but I do think that including more voices in the conversation is important.
Yeah, the two things I would say, one, to echo just the importance of talking about it with a lot of different people, so it's not a small subset of tech. But then how we talk about it, I think, really matters. And I think basic income is actually terrible branding for a bunch of reasons, but it's what the field has settled on. I have tried a few other things. I have a feeling that the concept that people actually are going to get their heads around is some version of equity where we own sort of some joint share and we establish a floor, but there is no ceiling. People can get as rich as they want. And I have a feeling that is going to be the new social contract we all agree on, and that it's going to be talked about with some equity-like mental model, but trying to figure that out would be a major contribution.
Great. We now want to open it up to a few questions from the audience. So again, raise your hand and then stand up. So we have Soren over here.
I'm wondering if it's like a government implements a model, do you guys think there's a way where people can still contribute? That the government should also say, well, if you get this money, you also need to do a certain amount of work for the good of the people. Or if there could be like a currency where you provide time and effort to do something else. How are you guys thinking about that?
I think we're testing in the study just like a purely unconditional model, partly because as a society we've moved so far towards like everything is highly conditioned, and I think it's going to be interesting to see people how people respond to that, and I think in a very positive way people actually know the best ways to allocate their time and their resources, and so I'm anxious to see that. I think there definitely could be as a policy some version of I've heard people mention it in exchange. We get around the sort of deservingness thing. They argue that you should have to do like a year of national service, and as a result, reward for that, you get basic income for your life. Or I think there are things that I don't know. Sometimes when you mandate it happening, then it doesn't happen as well. I think we are going to measure things like civic engagement and voluntarism and things like that, and it'll be interesting to see how this affects that.
I think, like, separately to all this, I think national service is a good idea, and it may be that we as society decide to go forward with some version like that. But I do think just saying, like, we trust you, you do what you want, we hope you'll give back to the world at some point, because this is all this value we create collectively for each other, is appealing. And we've gotten so far away from that it would be a good reset.
Over here.
My question really is, when you think about universal basic income, it's a centralized model, right? Someone is handing out something, deciding. With the continuous evolution of AI, AGI, and decentralized technology is also evolving protocols. Really, the future is not policy, but more driven by protocols and algorithms. So if you're beginning to combine those two, would this model sustain, right? I mean, there's a near-term impact which has to be resolved, and maybe this could be a solution, but it's truly a long-term solution, even as an experiment. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, again, I expect the implementation details to change a lot as the world changes, but this idea of, like, what happens if you just give people unconditional resources to do what they want with, I think that is important and worth testing no matter what happens with algorithms being in charge. So again, that's why we're not trying to study like the mechanics of how you give this out, how you afford it, whatever, but it's really just like, what is the impact this has on people's lives? I myself have benefited twice from a basic income, sort of. Once was when I was 19 or whatever, and Y Combinator gave me money to work on a company in a way that was considered very crazy, and you just don't do that, because if you give these people money, they're going to waste it, they don't have control, and some do, but some people, it turns out, do incredible things. And then the second thing, and the most important thing I ever did in my career, is after my company got acquired, I took sort of like a year sabbatical for the first 2 months, I was just like burned out and I did nothing, but that was turned out to be important for part 2, which is then the next like 10 months or 9 months. I spent 8 hours a day reading textbooks and meeting interesting people. And at the time, it was not clear how in every AI paper that came out, that was like the year it all started to work. And at the time, I was doing this only to sort of indulge my curiosity. It was not clear that any of it was going to come together. And then it turned out that all of that stuff guided the next 5 years of my career after that in really deeply important ways. And the cost of me doing that was not high at all. But if I had to have a job, I couldn't just afford the living expenses. You know, it was whatever it cost me to live, which is relatively cheap, plus a few $100s of like textbooks and like, you know, before Uber, I guess, or Uber was kind of around, but like gas to drive myself around to see people. And that was such a transformative thing for me. And I believe that if we, no matter what the policy is, no matter how it's allocated, a lot of people having that experience will be hugely net positive to value created in the world.
In the back there.
Hi, I'm actually, since you're talking about the future of work, I'm very intrigued about this particular company that you support called Gigster.
Yeah.
So, while on one hand, the Gigsters were doing whatever they want to do wherever they are in the world, on the other hand, the company is also an intelligence-based company, which is trying to do the human work for them. So, do you see the Gigsters actually being present at, say, 10 years down the line, actually any human work being part of the company, or not being present at all? And if not, will those Gigsters have actually created that data set for the AI to work? Will those be a part of it?
Look, I think one of the silliest policies right now is that every kid needs to learn computer science, because programming is going to be one of the first things that AI does really well. Yeah. You will be able to explain in clear language, I want this thing built, and we're going to like figure out how to do that, or we'll give you at least incredible tools. So no, Gigster aside, I expect a lot of that kind of work that right now you sort of pay a contractor to build a very simple thing for you. I think all of those jobs are going to go away. There will be hard programming jobs that still exist, but that kind of work, that is definitely going to be done by AI really well.
But then, would the Gigsters have a basic income guaranteed by the company because they've actually built a data set which the company is thriving?
So, I mean, I don't know if Gigster does this or not. I think companies in general, one of the reasons I like for-profit companies so much is that it does align incentives. And so if all the Gigster programmers have equity, hopefully they all benefit as the company is worth, you know, huge amounts of money. I personally think, like, people have talked about this idea that companies should do basic income for the jobs that they eliminate. I think that's unrealistic for a bunch of reasons. I think the government should do that. Companies should just try to build the best products and deliver them as well as they can. But I understand why people think the companies should do the basic incomes themselves. And I think, like, you know, very old school here, but I think like the government should figure out how to tax companies and people and then provide the services.
All right, so we have time for 1 or 2 more questions depending on the length. Over there.
The notion of giving people an amount and saying, we're going to trust you and hopefully you'll live a healthier, happier life is very interesting. And I was wondering if there's any examples out there where that has actually worked. And second to that, how are you choosing the inclusion criteria for it? Like who are we going to give it to? How young or old should they be? Is it the day you turn 18 that this is what we're going to give you and we're going to trust you to do that? Or what is sort of the barrier of the inclusion for that?
So for the study, we've had to make some decisions. I mean, in order to have statistical power, we need to have a significant sample size, but at the same time, the intervention in terms of giving people $1,000 a month is extraordinarily expensive. So if we included just everyone in the population, we really wouldn't, you know, because it's likely to have different effects across the income spectrum, across ages, we really wouldn't, our overall treatment effect might, you know, we might not be able to detect effects. So for this study, we've sort of limited it. There's an income cap at the area median, but anywhere, you know, from 0 income up to the area median, which is, you know, a pretty large number. And in Alameda County, for example, it's like $65,000 for a single individual. And then we have put ages 21 to 40, partly, you know, because we hope that the effects on kids and how that sort of economic stability could affect children at that early age is really important. I think also politically in terms of a policy. And so we wanted to have a large enough group of kids, hopefully, during the study to be able to study those types of effects. There was the beginning part of the question. I don't remember. Oh, yes. So there's a number, certainly there are cash transfer studies in developing countries that all have extremely positive findings. People make investments, they actually tend to work more. Spending on alcohol, drugs, quote unquote, sin goods, temptation goods goes down. Even in the US, if you look at expenditures using the Earned Income Tax Credit, which is sort of the largest cash that we give out now, often, there's problems with that in that people end up having to go into debt by the end of the year. It's a lump sum, and so it's tricky, but they don't, I think it's less than 10% of people spend it on, treats kind of things. I think that's how they classified it in the paper. But then, they're even on Native American reservations where they have a casino dividend. They've seen drastic improvements in health, decreases in alcoholism and smoking. And so, results have been positive. It hasn't been done on this scale in, the US, but evidence suggests that results will be positive. Yeah, so the Finnish study it's in process right now. It's a little bit different. We've been working with the Finns on it, and their original research design looked a lot more like ours, but then because the government's doing it, kind of got cut down. So right now they focused on the chronically long-term unemployed, and they're replacing a number of other benefits with the cash payment. So it's the context is very different. Also, the existing social safety net in Finland is very different than it is here. And so, they're using pretty much just administrative data, but, to what extent we can compare results, we are working on it. I haven't seen that data, no, but I'd love to.
Okay, final quick question, all the way in the back there.
Hi, Andre. I was wondering whether you could extrapolate any data on the macroeconomic impacts that you mentioned. I know that inflation, for example, is a big concern. So is your study going to be able to say anything, or are you saying we can't say anything about that?
We can estimate some. We can't predict the flex on prices or anything like that. The Kenyan study, and even if we did an entire city, it's such an open economy, it's really difficult to, even if the entire state of California, there's still an open economy, people could move. So it's really difficult. It's going to be difficult to sort of estimate those with any certainty. But the Kenyan study that GiveDirectly is doing is randomizing at the village level. Obviously, the context is quite different, but they are doing some general equilibrium effects, so they will be able to begin to address that question. But if you look at Alaska, they've done studies because everyone gets this money from the permanent fund, and prices, there's no change in prices. Obviously, it's not a monthly, but you might expect prices to jump up when everyone gets this $2,000 check, and they actually don't.
Great. So lastly, I want to ask you, do you see any challenges ahead that people here could help you with, or is there any ask you would like to make to the audience on this study?
Well, obviously, we're fundraising. It's a very expensive study, so we're grateful for contributions. I think, we have a website that has sort of the research design. We're always interested in feedback, and you can sign up. We're going to be up. We have a blog where we'll regularly post updates, and as we start to get findings, that kind of stuff will be there. And yeah.
That'd be great.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.